I going to be okay with something?
Hi, guys. Hi, everybody. Bonjour, bonjour.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour. Bon matin. My name is Yvan Baker, and I'm the Member of Parliament for Etobicoke Centre, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you today. Thank you for coming. Je m'appelle Yvan Baker, je suis le député d'Etobicoke Centre. Merci d'être ici avec nous ce matin. I'd like to start by acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat. I'm pleased to be joined today by the Honourable Marco Mendicino, our Minister of Public Safety, and the Honourable Mélanie Joly, our Minister of Foreign Affairs. Shortly after I was elected to represent this community of Etobicoke Centre in 2014, my predecessor and mentor gave me a piece of advice that I want to share with you. She said to me, you know, Yvan, we often see our politicians when they are speaking to us behind a podium, kind of like I am now. And she said, and so many people believe that the most important job of a politician is to talk or communicate. But she said the reality is the most important job of a politician is to listen. And the reason I share that with you today is because since I've been elected here in 2014 in Etobicoke Centre, I have listened and I've heard from my constituents that one of their priorities that they want to see the government address is keeping our communities safe, especially from gun violence. And this is why I'm excited to be here today with Minister Mendicino, with Minister Joly, who will make an announcement on our government's continuing efforts to keep our communities safe from gun violence. Je suis très fier d'être ici aujourd'hui avec le ministre Mendicino, la ministre Joly, qui vont faire une annonce sur les efforts continus du gouvernement afin de garder nos communautés à l'abri de la violence causée par les armes à feu. To give you an event of how today will unfold, we will hear brief remarks from Minister Mendicino and then brief remarks from Minister Joly, followed by a question and answer session. So I will start by saying I've had the pleasure of working with Minister Mendicino for a number of years now. I will say on a number of issues. I will say that Minister Mendicino listens and he acts to address the concerns that I raise with him, that other caucus members raise with him, and I think his presence here today and today's announcement underlines that. So I'd like to welcome the Honourable Marco Mendicino, our Minister of Public Safety.
Bravo.
Thank you very much, Yvan. Merci, Yvan. Bienvenue, Mel. Thank you all. Merci. Thank you all very much for being here today. And I also want to thank you, Yvan, for the land acknowledgement and for allowing us to commence these proceedings in the right way, this important announcement. But I also want to take a moment to express my gratitude to you, Yvan, for your advocacy, because, as you say, you are a good listener, and you are not just somebody who listens. You advocate and you act, whether we're talking about matters that are related to the economy and helping Canadians address some of the pressures that we've seen around cost of living and inflation. You've always been out front on that issue, on climate change, on international human rights. And Yvan, in particular, I want to thank you for your incredible leadership on Ukraine. I know somebody that we all listen to very carefully and very closely, and something that I know that Minister Joly profits from very much as we continue to push back against the awful and brutal attacks that are being carried out by Mr. Putin, which is obviously unacceptable, and we thank you for your leadership. I want to thank you, Mel, for coming today, and this is a very pleasant collaboration to be able to work together with you on the matter of public safety, and in particular on the matter that relates to keeping our communities safe vis-a-vis the violence that we have seen that is caused by guns and handguns. You know, just yesterday I was in Montreal, in your hometown, to make an important announcement, which I'll come to in a moment. But it is really important that all Canadians know that fighting against gun violence isn't just about one department. It's not just about public safety or law enforcement. It's about taking a whole of government approach, and hopefully as we start to get into the details of today's announcement, Canadians will see and will feel that we are working very closely together to meet their needs, because there's no doubt that there is a very pressing issue that lies before us, and that is the necessity to eradicate gun violence, one of the most pernicious and complex social harms that we see visited upon our communities every day. And you know, this isn't just about an important policy announcement. This is about paying homage to every single person who has been impacted by gun violence. I have had the privilege of coming to know survivors and victims who have been touched by gun violence right across this country. Here in my hometown, I represent a riding just a little bit north of here in Eglinton Lawrence, which is unfortunately one of those communities that sees way more than its fair share of gun violence, and it has to stop. Et même à Montréal, pendant les dernières journées, il y a 3 autres personnes qui étaient tuées au cause de la violence causée par les armes à feu. C'est exactement la raison que j'étais là avec le ministre Rodriguez pour annoncer une nouvelle collaboration avec la province de Québec pour prévenir la violence causée par les armes à feu. Donc, il faut dire tout d'abord qu'il y a une urgence à la situation. We have to continue to act. So, it is precisely because of those challenges that our government has been acting, and I've been acting as Minister of Public Safety, and this has been a very important week in the fight against gun violence right across the country. On Monday, we were in Northern Ontario to bring new support for the city of Sudbury to stop gun violence before it starts. That city will be getting $2 million from the Building Safer Communities Fund to help support local programs that can tackle gun crime at its root causes. On Wednesday, I was in Sault Ste. Marie at one of Canada's busiest border crossings to see firsthand the work that CBSA and our frontline border agents are doing in the fight against illegal smuggling of guns into our country. Et comme j'avais déjà dit hier, j'étais à Montréal pour annoncer l'octroi de près de 42 millions de dollars du fonds pour des collectivités plus sécuritaires aux villes du Québec. J'étais particulièrement frappé par les défenseurs communautaires que j'ai rencontrés, des gens qui aident les jeunes à se préparer à réussir dans la vie. And today, I'm pleased to be back right here in Toronto, in our hometown, Yvan, a place that, as I said, has seen far too much gun violence and impacting far too many people in far too communities. And, you know, I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the important partnership that we have at the federal level with my friend and my colleague, Mayor John Tory, who I know is somebody that feels very passionately that we have to do more. Not at just one level of government, but across all government levels. And so I do want to take a moment to acknowledge his contribution and the presence of members of the Toronto Police Service who do outstanding work, as do all of our police services right across the country in the fight against gun violence, perhaps one of the most difficult and pressing challenges that we face today. Before I talk about the details of the announcement, let me take a step back and give all of Canadians a bit of an overview of the comprehensive strategy that the Government of Canada is taking to tackle gun violence. The centerpiece right now of that strategy is, of course, Bill C-21, which in shorthand would do 3 important things. First, introduce and implement a national handgun freeze, reversing the growth of that type of gun on approximation of about 55,000 new registrations each and every year, so people can visualize exactly how much that particular style of gun is growing in Canada. Second, it would introduce red flag and yellow flag protocols to reverse the alarming trend in the connection between domestic violence and the presence of guns, which between 2013 and 2019 went up over 30%. And third and finally, Bill C-21 would introduce new tools for law enforcement, including stiffer sentences for those organized criminals, those hardened criminals who would try to attempt to terrorize our communities by illegally importing them across our borders and then trafficking them within our communities, but equally give them new wiretapping powers so that we could interdict those guns before they get into our communities in the first instance. I said when we introduced this bill that we needed to pass it as quickly as possible, and I'm continuing to call on all MPs to read the bill, to study the bill, and to put it into law as quickly as possible. We've made some good headway, and I do want to acknowledge with our colleagues in the NDP, as well as even the Bloc Québécois, which I'm grateful for, and we're going to continue to work with those parties. Unfortunately, it's the Conservatives who continue to obstruct the passage of this bill, something that we have become very familiar with over the last number of years as they continue to block efforts to pass C-21, as they have said in the past that they would pull back on the national ban that we put into place for assault-style rifles, which have led to some of the most devastating shooting tragedies right across the country. It's one of the reasons why it's important, it's imperative that we continue to move forward with the mandatory buyback program, which will see those AR-15 style rifles removed from our communities once and for all. They have no place in any community, in any neighborhood, in any street. They have one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to kill people as quickly and as devastatingly as possible. And this is, again, part of our overall strategy, which we need to move forward with. Au cours de la dernière décennie, plus de 60% de tous les crimes au Canada ont été commis avec une arme de poing. Et au cours de la même période, le nombre d'armes de poing dans notre pays a augmenté de plus de 70%. Ces tendances doivent être inversées et c'est exactement la raison pour laquelle nous avons proposé un gel national des armes de poing. What I just said in English is that one of the other alarming trends is that we have seen handgun violence specifically go up by significant percentages, and that's one of the reasons why it's so important that we put into place the national handgun freeze. This is advice that we've received not only from law enforcement, which would be a step in the right direction, but equally those survivors and those victims and those women's groups who we've engaged with robustly and will continue to engage with robustly as we move forward with a comprehensive strategy. We can't tolerate the status quo. As I said, we've seen additional loss of innocent life in Montreal, 3 more people lost to gun violence in the last few days. We continue to see shootings here in my hometown in Toronto and right across the country. The status quo is unacceptable. We must act with what Martin Luther King once called the fierce urgency of now. And that's why when we introduced Bill C-21, we also brought forward regulations that bring the provisions of the National Handgun Freeze into effect within 30 sitting days of Parliament. But we didn't stop there. In mid-June, my colleague MP Talib Nur Mohammed, who sits on the Standing Committee for Public Safety, moved a motion that would see that national handgun freeze implemented immediately. It was a common-sense measure, it was a good motion, and was supported by our colleagues in the NDP as well as the Bloc Québécois, which demonstrated its broad bipartisan appeal. But rather than work with us to save lives, what did the Conservatives do? They blocked that motion. They had an opportunity to build bridges with us, and instead they built barriers. We've been clear from the beginning that we will use every single tool at our disposal to protect Canadians and to stop gun violence. We are not going to let the Conservatives, obstructionism, stand in the way of better protecting our communities and saving lives. And as a government, we are going to act. And that brings me to why we are here today. I'm proud to announce that our government has decided to ban the importation of handguns. Through a regulatory mechanism enacted by my colleague, Minister Joly, nearly all individuals and businesses in Canada will be banned from importing handguns on a go-forward. Given that nearly all our handguns are imported, this means that we're bringing our national handgun freeze into effect even sooner. Now, the measures will take effect on August 19, as I understand it, and Minister Joly will have more to say. Put simply, from that moment forward, the number of handguns in Canada will only go down. Our hope is that this temporary measure, one that is made moot should and when Parliament passes Bill C-21, along with the amendments to the regulations under the Firearms Act, as they hope they will. But in the meantime, this announcement is further proof of our commitment to leave no stone unturned in our quest to prevent gun crime in our country. We'll keep finding new tools to keep Canadians safe. Je suis fier d'annoncer que notre gouvernement a décidé d'interdire l'importation d'armes de poing. Grâce à un mécanisme de réglementation adopté par ma collègue le ministre Joly, presque tous les particuliers et toutes les entreprises se verront interdire l'importation d'armes de poing. Étant donné que presque toutes nos armes de poing sont importées, cela signifie que le gel national des armes de poing entrera en vigueur plus tôt. Ces mesures prendront effet le 19 août. En termes simples, à partir de ce moment-là, le nombre d'armes de poing au Canada ne fera que diminuer. Nous espérons qu'il s'agira d'une mesure temporaire qui deviendra sans objet si les parlementaires et quand les parlementaires adoptent le projet de loi C-21 cet automne comme nous l'espérons. C'est une preuve supplémentaire de notre engagement à ne négliger aucune piste dans notre quête pour prévenir les crimes comme avec des armes à feu dans notre pays. Nous continuerons à trouver de nouveaux outils pour assurer la sécurité des Canadiens. So with that, I will say thank you again for being here. Thank you, Yvonne, for welcoming us to your riding and to your neighborhood for this important announcement. And thank you, Mel, for being here. And I will now turn it over to you for some additional details. Merci beaucoup.
Merci, Marco. Thanks. Okay. Bon, ben bonjour tout le monde. Great to see all of you. I hope you're not too warm. The sun is extremely hot right now, and you guys have jackets, but it's great to be here. Yvonne, it's really a pleasure to see you in your riding, because we've been talking over the phone in the House of Commons, or sometimes when I'm abroad, and you've been extremely passionate about the issue regarding Ukraine, yourself being part of the community, but I must say extremely thoughtful, helpful. You have a very good judgment. And people in Etobicoke and members of the Ukrainian community can be proud of your work.
Thank you very much.
At the same time, we know behind cameras there's a certain Amanda Simard. Donc, Amanda est connue par tous les francophones au pays. Amanda est la conjointe de Yvonne. Alors, je voulais juste saluer Amanda parce qu'on se connaît bien et je t'apprécie beaucoup. Merci encore pour ton leadership sur les questions de langues officielles. And Marco, I must say that the question of gun control is a difficult issue. Canadians have been expecting a lot of leadership on the part of our government, as they're extremely preoccupied with gun violence. And you've shown historic leadership. And I'm here to be your ally to support you. Because, of course, this is top of mind, and we have a moral duty to make sure that as ministers, we do everything in our power to live up to Canadians' expectations. Donc, merci beaucoup pour ton travail. Ça me fait plaisir de t'appuyer. So, no matter where we live, who we love, or where we pray, all Canadians deserve to feel safe in their communities. As a government, it is our collective responsibility to use all the tools at our disposal to make that so. Gun violence have no place in Canada, and one Canadian killed by gun violence is one too many. We're too often reminded of what it is at stake, and we cannot be complacent. The time is now to get guns off our streets, keep them out, and bring more resources into communities. And Marco beforehand referred to the fact that as an MP in the Toronto region, he is daily and weekly affected by the question of gun violence. This week, in my riding of Handgun in Montreal, there was a shooting, another one. And that is why also I wanted to make sure as MP, but also as Minister of Foreign Affairs, I would step up my game to answer the call of constituents in my riding, but also across Canada, to do what I could do in my own portfolio to make sure that we could tackle gun violence. Because this is an issue I take very, very seriously, obviously, but that is very, very close to my heart. As Canada's Foreign Minister, I have the authority to deny any export or import permit application that is contrary to Canada's security. When making these decisions, I always keep Canadian interests, safety, and security top of mind. This is a role that I'm very proud to fulfill, and a responsibility that I really don't take lightly. So, Marco referred earlier about the introduction of Bill C-21, which is a strong plan to tackle gun violence. And today, we are announcing an import ban on handguns. This measure aligns with the handgun freeze proposed in Bill C-21 and includes the same exceptions as Bill C-21. In effect, this ban is a stopgap, while the handgun freeze is moves through the parliamentary process, preventing shelves from being restocked in the immediate term. So what we saw when the Prime Minister and Marco announced a handgun freeze is that there was an uptick in gun being purchased in the country, We want to prevent that. That is why we're announcing this import ban. As mentioned by Marco, we know that the vast majority of handguns in the countries are imported, as there's no handgun producer in the country. So we know that no one is immune to gun violence, and we must work together if we're going to tackle it. The ban will come into effect in 2 weeks on August 19 and will remain into effect until Bill C-21 comes into force. And that means that when needed, in times like these, we must be prepared to bolster the current measures that protect Canadians so that they remain solid, seamless, and consistent. The import ban that we're announcing today, coupled with Canada's already very strict import controls, will keep handguns off of Canada's streets and out of our schoolyards. Alors, ça me fait plaisir de répéter tout ça en français. On le sait que peu importe où on vit, qui on aime et où on prie, tous les Canadiens se méritent d'être en sécurité chez soi. En tant que gouvernement, c'est notre responsabilité d'utiliser tous les outils à notre disposition pour protéger notre monde. La violence armée n'a pas sa place au Canada et une personne qui meurt à cause de la violence par arme à feu est une personne de trop. Et comme je disais en anglais un peu plus tôt, en tant que députée d'un de ces quartiers-villes où il y a eu encore une fusillade la semaine dernière, je suis extrêmement préoccupée par la situation. Je sais que les gens s'attendent à ce qu'on fasse plus. Et c'est pourquoi, en tant que ministre des Affaires étrangères, j'ai décidé de travailler avec mon collègue pour trouver comment, à ma manière, je pouvais l'aider et aider notre gouvernement à faire en sorte de vraiment en faire plus en matière de contrôle d'armes à feu. Et donc, l'heure est venue d'empêcher les armes à feu de circuler dans nos rues, d'apporter plus de ressources à nos milieux pour lutter contre la violence armée. Et donc, en tant que ministre des Affaires étrangères du Canada, j'ai le pouvoir de refuser toute demande de licence d'exportation ou d'importation qui est contraire à la sécurité du Canada. Lorsque je prends des décisions, je garde toujours à l'esprit les intérêts et la sécurité et la sûreté de notre pays. Alors aujourd'hui, j'ai le plaisir d'annoncer une interdiction d'importation d'armes de poing. L'objectif est vraiment d'être aligné avec le gel des armes de poing proposé dans le projet de loi C-21 qui a été présenté par mon collègue et comprend les mêmes exceptions. L'interdiction qui est présentée par la mesure que je vous annonce aujourd'hui est vraiment importante. Pourquoi? Parce qu'il faut empêcher que les tablettes des commerçants qui vendent des armes de poing puissent vraiment se remplir au même moment où on essaie de restreindre les armes à feu, les armes de poing dans nos communautés. Alors, on prend action présentement et notre objectif est justement de faire en sorte qu'il y a une interdiction d'importation d'armes de poing au pays. L'interdiction va entrer en vigueur le 19 août, donc dans 2 semaines, et jusqu'à ce que le projet de loi C-21 prenne effet. Personne n'est à l'abri de la violence armée et nous devons travailler ensemble pour nous y attaquer. Et l'interdiction annoncée aujourd'hui, en tandem avec nos contrôles d'importation qui sont déjà très stricts, va empêcher les armes de poing de circuler dans nos rues et dans nos cours d'école, de Surrey à Toronto, en passant par Montréal et un de ses quartiers-villes. Alors, ça va me faire plaisir de répondre à vos questions. Merci beaucoup. Thank you so much. And meanwhile, I hope that you're okay and drinking water as well.
Questions, commentaires?
Oui, nous allons maintenant commencer la séance de questions et réponses. We'll now begin the question and answer session. So if you can please go up to the mic, state your name, the outlet you're with, and to whom your question is directed. We'll be taking one question and one follow-up today. Thank you.
Thank you for taking my questions. It's Michelle Song, CBC News. And my first question is for Minister Joly.
Yep.
If you can answer in English and French, please.
Yep.
So China summoned Canada, Chargé, and Beijing, Jim Nicol, over the issue of Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
How will Canada respond? Will you be summoning the Chinese ambassador? And what is your response to China's retaliation against the United States today, halting military and climate ties, while also conducting military drills near Taiwan?
Well, of course, we're extremely concerned with what's going on in the region. We call on China to calm down its rhetoric. Of course, the visit of The U.S. top legislator, Nancy Pelosi, cannot be used as a pretext to hide intention to destabilize the region. We know, indeed, you're right, that the chargé in Beijing has been summoned by the Chinese government. It has been the case also for ambassadors and chargés from all G7 countries. We're following the situation very closely. Meanwhile, what I would say is that we're in close contact with our G7 allies as we want to be coordinated on this issue. We want to make sure that we appease tensions. Of course, like I mentioned, China cannot use the visit of Nancy Pelosi as a pretext, as a justification, because we already know that these visits are customary or routine. And at the same time, on the question of climate change, it is important that we continue to engage, as this is a generational issue threatening the entire human race. So in that sense, we need to make sure that we put that as a top priority, and it is the case for me. Donc, en français, ce que je vous dirais, c'est que on est extrêmement préoccupés. Je suis extrêmement préoccupée par ce qui se passe, particulièrement la rhétorique agressive de la part de la Chine. Nous en appelons à la Chine pour réduire les tensions. Bien entendu, la visite de Nancy Pelosi, la visite de cette figure importante de la législature américaine ne peut pas être utilisée comme un prétexte, comme une justification par le gouvernement chinois pour augmenter les tensions et déstabiliser la région. Alors, je suis la question de très près. Je suis en contact avec également mes collègues du G7 sur la question parce qu'on veut être coordonnés. Il va de soi que l'information que vous avez, elle est exacte. En effet, notre chargé d'affaires à Beijing a été sermonné par les autorités chinoises. Ça a été le cas aussi ça a été le cas également pour les autres alliés du G7. Leurs ambassadeurs et chargés d'affaires ont également été sermonnés. Présentement, nous travaillons pour être coordonnés parce que nous voulons avoir la même réaction. Nous pensons qu'il est plus important d'agir de façon coordonnée. Et puis, au même moment, nous savons que nous devons aussi continuer les conversations sur les questions de changement climatique parce que nous savons qu'il s'agit d'un problème générationnel plus grand qu'un pays qui affecte la race humaine et qui doit être discuté de façon coordonnée.
Thank you. And my follow-ups for Minister Mendicino. If you can also answer in English and French, why didn't you just bring the firearms import ban right away when you announced your intentions in May?
Well, one of the first things that we did when we tabled Bill C-21 is we turned our mind to the potential risk of a run on the market, and that's why at the very same moment we tabled the amendments to the regulations to the Firearms Act, and we were gaining some traction with opposition parties in the NDP and in the Bloc Québécois to see those particular provisions come into force even sooner than the required 30 sitting days in Parliament. I'd also point out that we've been not resting on our laurels, that we have been continuing to roll out a comprehensive strategy to reduce gun violence, which includes additional investments both at the border, and one of the things that I've been doing throughout the course of the summer is going to many of our ports of entries, particularly inland ports of entries where there are the potential for illegal smuggling operations to take place, to see with my own eyes and firsthand the fruits of the investments, I beg your pardon, that we're making at the federal level. So what does that look like in plain terms? It means making sure that we've got enough people at the border, making sure that we're using state-of-the-art technology. And I can tell you that we are making progress in stopping more illegal trafficking of guns at the border. In 2021, we actually seized a record number of guns. That's a good thing. But the reality is that we need to do more. And one of the other things that we've been doing throughout the course of the summer is that we have been accelerating the rollout of the $250 million Building Safer Fund. And as I said yesterday, we were in the province of Quebec to announce a $40 million investment in that province, which will allow us to empower communities who know best how to put in place the practical solutions by reducing barriers within communities, giving greater access to young people in communities that are at risk, whether we're talking about programming to develop skills that will help them with their school, with their careers, so that if they're exposed to elements which would take them down the wrong path, they choose to stay on the right path. And that's having an impact, not only in Quebec, but right across the country. Donc, quand nous avons annoncé le projet de loi C-21, au même temps, nous avons introduire et proposer des changements à le règlement sous la loi de les armes à feu pour entrer en rigueur, en force, l'effet d'un gel national pour les armes de poing. On avait fait des progrès avec l'MPD, et y compris le Bloc québécois, mais c'est toujours les conservateurs qui obstructaient, qui jouaient des chicanes, qui était un grand problème pour tout le monde. Donc, il faut continuer. Pendant l'été, j'ai fait une tournée à nos frontières pour regarder avec mes yeux propres le bon progrès, le bon travail des membres de l'ASFC. La dernière année, on a saisi un record cible des armes à feu, mais il faut aller plus loin. Il faut continuer avec des investissements pour soutenir les efforts. Et il faut accélérer le progrès de nouveaux programmes qui est là pour prévenir la violence avant de se commencer. Et c'est exactement la raison que j'étais là à Montréal. C'est la raison que j'avais déjà fait des annonces ici, chez moi, à Toronto, qui bénéficiaient les communautés d'Yvan et tout le monde partout le pays.
Thank you.
Hi, Adrian Gabriel with CTV National News. I've got a question for both of you. I'll start with Minister Joly, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Have you gotten a glass of water?
Not yet.
Okay,
It's coming.
because
It's coming.
good, we have one for you.
When it comes to the Ukraine, did the Canadian Embassy withhold information from its staff in Kyiv that they were being targeted by Russia at the beginning of the invasion? As the Foreign Affairs Minister, shouldn't something like this cross your desk?
So, to your first question, no. To your second question, it never crossed my desk because there was no information.
And maybe just one follow-up on that then. And so you're now launching an investigation. Why didn't it cross your desk then? Are you concerned that it didn't?
Because there was no information, so it couldn't cross my desk. That's my point.
Fair enough.
Thank you.
Minister Mendicino, on today's gun announcement, the suspect in Montreal accused of killing 3 people was known to police and had a history with mental health issues. Today there are some reports the suspect had a semi-automatic weapon, not a handgun, when confronted by police. First, can you confirm that he had a semi-automatic weapon? If so, how was he able to obtain such a weapon?
Well, with regards to the particulars of that investigation, I will defer to the SPVM, and for good reason. That's an active investigation, and those details are best left to police to answer. With regards to the broader observation, which I think is the premise of your question about how it is that people get access to guns who should never be in possession of them, I mean, that is precisely why we are here exhausting all options. It's important that that everybody recognizes just how complex a problem this is. We're not going to solve this overnight. We're not going to solve it with any one of the measures in isolation by itself. I want us to pass Bill C-21. I want to make sure that we put in place a national handgun freeze, that we give police additional tools so that we can send a strong message to organized crime and gangs that if they are going to terrorize our communities, that they face the prospect of a stiffer sentence. I want to make sure that we are putting in place red flag and yellow flag laws, which, for everybody's benefit, would allow a judge to take away somebody's gun who has no business being in possession of it if they pose a risk to anybody else or themselves. And disproportionately, that means women. Between 2013 and 2019, we saw the connection between domestic and gender-based violence and the presence of guns go up over 30%. These are all tools which could mitigate against the very risk which you pose to me right now, which is how do we stop people from getting into possessions of guns, whether you're talking about a handgun, a semi-automatic, or indeed an assault rifle, which this government took the decision to ban nationally 2 years ago. And we've got to do all of this work in conjunction with the mandatory buyback program, which we're moving forward with. I'd said at the time that we launched Bill C-21 that we were going to move forward with haste. And just a little bit earlier this summer, we published a pricing list which we hope will be able to work with the industry and those who possess those guns and lawfully purchased them at the time that they did, to surrender them and to get a fair price for them in a way that's transparent and fair. It's why yesterday I was in Montreal to roll out over $40 million for Quebec, leveraging the skills, the experience, frankly, the wisdom of local communities who work day in and day out in neighborhoods just like this. We're in a school where kids come, where parents, will be sending them back in just a few weeks' time. We want them to be safe. We want them to be safe from gun crime. We want them to be safe from all forms of violence. And my message to you in response to your question is that to do that, we need to do not one of these things in isolation, but all of them at the same time. Pass smart common sense laws like Bill C-21, continue to invest in police at our borders and in our communities, and put in place preventative strategies to address the root causes of gun crime so that no one has possession of a gun if they have no lawful reason to do so.
If I could ask you one follow-up question. Will the handgun ban, will the importation ban on handguns include handgun parts? Because we know that a lot of times criminals are assembling these guns from different parts, and those guns are then used in our communities.
Look, the important point about today's announcement is that it is another step towards ultimately achieving the end goal of our agenda, which is to reverse the growth of a particular category of gun in handguns, which is now the #1 type of gun used in homicides. And thanks to the innovation and the creativity of my colleague, Minister Joly, and her department, we're putting that step into action. And together, taken cumulatively with the other things that we are doing as part of an overall comprehensive strategy, we hope to reverse the trend of a growth of a type of gun that has seen approximately 45 to 55,000 new registrations every year. You can visualize how much that's going to continue to compound and grow, and I don't think it's any coincidence that as we have seen that universe of gun grow, that we've seen handgun crime and handgun violence and people having their lives taken away by that type of gun. Today's announcement is a step to reverse that trend. Merci.
One last question. What would you say to a critic who says without banning the importation of handgun parts, it's really not going to do much to keep handguns out of the hands of criminals?
My response to that question is we're leaving all options on the table. We're going to continue to be resourceful and creative to achieve the goal of Bill C-21 and the amendments to the regulations under the Firearms Act. The status quo is not working. I mean, before I got into politics, I worked on the front lines of the criminal justice system, and you could mark it like a clock. Every year, we see in the summer shootings spike, the loss of life go up. And it is a tragic phenomenon. And we see it in Toronto, we see it in Montreal, we're seeing it in other big cities like Vancouver and Winnipeg, right across the country. So naturally, our response to that is it's unacceptable. And we're here to unpack the details of this announcement, the importance of what this policy means, but too often we give short shrift to the cost of the loss of life. And that has to be the singular motivation of this government. It's to do better by those who have been directly impacted by gun violence, those who've lost a loved one, those who have personally, like people that I have spoken to who have been personally injured and forever scarred traumatically by the impact of gun violence. So my answer to you is we are going to continue to exhaust all options.
Can I add something? So when Minister Mendicino came up with C-21, so the new bill on gun control, we saw an uptick in gun being purchased across the country, handguns in particular. And so this preoccupied a lot my colleague. So Minister Mendicino, Marco, reached out to all of us to say, what can we do? What is in our toolbox to go ahead and prevent that ongoing until Bill C-21 comes into force? There is no import system. There's no import permits until today that were required for owners, individuals, businesses, to buy handguns from elsewhere in the world and bring them to Canada. And so working with Marco, we came up with this idea of creating this new system of requiring permits. But meanwhile, we will deny any permits from any commercial entity or people wanting to bring handguns to Canada. So this is how creatively we've worked, and that's why we're talking today about an import ban. It's our way to make sure that ultimately we're keeping Canadians safe. And that's why I wanted to thank my colleague, because sometimes when you're in government, you're in your own reality, but you have to reach out to your colleagues to find ways to tackle a very specific issue. This has been a top priority for us. We campaigned on it last summer. This was certainly something that we heard when going door to door here in this riding, but also across the country. And so now it is our answer 1 year later, along with Bill C-21, to Canadians that were concerned when we talked to them and listened to them last summer.
We have time for one last question.
Jordan Olmsted with the Canadian Press. Will there be other additional resources for CBSA or cooperation with CBP given the announcement and the things that we're seeing crossing the border, like gun-carrying drones and those reports?
Well, there's no doubt that one of the sources of gun violence is illegal trafficking on the border, and that's one of the reasons why in my travels across the country I have been engaging and meeting with frontline officers to see exactly where we're making progress, where we need to do more to equip CBSA with all of the tools they need. So we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars on that front. There is additional financial resources which have been allocated to further buttress those boots on the ground, but equally to purchase state-of-the-art technology. I mean, it used to take, could take up to hours to examine a commercial vehicle to see where guns may be secreted. We can now do that in a matter of minutes, thanks to the state-of-the-art technology that we are purchasing with federal investments. We have exceptional K9 units. I've had the chance to meet a number of very talented dogs and K9s right across the country who also help to interdict and to detect illegal guns which have been secreted in vehicles, commercial and otherwise. So despite all that progress, we've got to do more. I mean, the statistics do, I think, paint an alarming picture, and not only do we got to invest domestically, but we also have to cooperate with our American counterparts. And earlier this week, I had the chance to speak with Secretary Mayorkas, who heads up the Department of Homeland Security, somebody that I keep in touch with. He and I agreed that we would reinvigorate this cross-border crime forum, which, again, in very clear terms, brings law enforcement on both sides, CBSA, RCMP, CBP, other branches within the Americans, to share information, share technology, better understand the routes on how guns are illegally trafficked from the United States into Canada so we can stop it before they get here. So it's a multifaceted strategy within a much broader, comprehensive strategy to make sure that we're addressing the specific problem of seeing guns illegally trafficked into Canada.
I think this next one's for Minister Joly.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Why bring this ban in 2 weeks? Why not sooner?
So usually it's 30 days. So 30 business days. We decided to go as fast as possible, to put it in 10 business days, so that amounts to 2 weeks because we're Friday. And so that's why we want to make sure that we follow due process, but we go as fast as we can because it is extremely urgent. Thank you.
Merci. Ceci met fin au point de presse. This concludes the press conference. Thank you very much all for being here today.